Play the violin, and I'll marry you." He laughed. The room laughed too, until her music made them cry. The sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the grand hall, dancing over the marble floors like liquid gold. The guests in their glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos whispered among themselves, laughter mingling with the gentle notes of the orchestra. At the center of it all stood a young maid, her eyes lowered, her hands trembling as she held the hem of her apron. A man in a perfectly pressed suit, a millionaire known for his arrogance and charm, lifted a violin with a teasing smirk. His words, sharp and mocking, cut through the air. "Play the violin, and I'll marry you." The crowd chuckled, expecting a spectacle, but what followed that day would silence everyone and change lives forever. Sparkles. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, humility, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more heart-touching, real-life stories that remind us of what truly matters. The maid's name was Elena. She was only 20, yet her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived a lifetime of sorrow. Her mother had passed away when she was a child, and her father, a humble violin maker, had raised her alone. He used to say, "Elena, the violin speaks when words fail. Play with your heart and the world will listen." But when her father fell ill, Elena sold everything, including the last violin he had ever made, to afford his medicine. It wasn't enough. She lost him soon after, and with nowhere else to go, she came to the city, working as a maid in the mansion of Mr. Adrian Devo, a wealthy businessman known for. Adrian had inherited his fortune young, building his empire with ruthless ambition. To him, people were tools, and emotions were weaknesses. He often threw grand parties where the city's elite gathered to bask in luxury and gossip. Elena usually kept to the shadows, serving drinks or cleaning quietly while others sparkled. But fate has a way of weaving threads no one sees coming. That day the mansion was alive. Adrian was in high spirits, boasting about his new collection of rare violins, hand-carved from centuries-old wood. A guest, half drunk, pointed at Elena standing silently near the doorway and said mockingly, "Why not let the maid play one for us?" The crowd laughed, and Adrian, amused, picked up one of his prized violins and extended it toward her. "Play the violin and I'll marry you," he said with a chuckle. The laughter grew. Her hands twisted in front of her apron. She hadn't touched a violin in years, not since her father's passing. But behind her lowered lashes, something stirred. A memory, a longing. She could almost hear her father's voice whispering, "Play with your heart, Elena." She looked up, her voice soft but steady. "May I?" she asked. Adrian shrugged carelessly, gesturing for her to take it. The hall went silent. The guests exchanged amused glances, expecting a clumsy attempt. Elena held the violin like an old friend, brushing her fingers gently over the strings. When she lifted the bow, a hush fell so complete, it felt like time itself had paused. The first note trembled, soft, uncertain, but then grew stronger, richer, alive. The melody poured from her soul, raw and pure, telling stories of love, loss, and quiet strength. It wasn't just music. It was emotion made sound. Her playing carried the ache of nights spent crying alone, the warmth of her father's voice, the hope that maybe kindness still existed in a world that had forgotten her. People stopped breathing. Even Adrian's smirk faded. The sound filled the entire hall, reaching corners untouched by laughter or vanity. Some of the guests wiped their eyes. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was sacred, the kind of silence that comes only after something holy. Elena lowered the violin, her eyes glistening. Adrian stood motionless, staring at her as if seeing a human being for the first time. His chest felt tight, and for once he didn't know what to say. Slowly, the room erupted, not in laughter, but in thunderous applause. Guests rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, calling her name. But Elena didn't smile. She simply bowed her head and whispered, "Thank you," before walking quietly toward the door. That night haunted Adrian. He couldn't sleep. The melody replayed in his mind again and again. For the first time he saw the emptiness of his own life. The endless parties, the meaningless wealth, the arrogance that had blinded him. The next morning he called for Elena, but she had already left the mansion. No one knew where she had gone. Weeks passed. Adrian tried to find her, sending letters to nearby villages, asking everyone if they knew a girl who played the violin like that. One rainy afternoon, while driving through the countryside, he heard faint music coming from a small chapel. He stopped the car and followed the sound. Inside, sitting alone near the altar, was Elena playing a violin that looked old but loved, one that he realized with a shock was from his own collection. She looked up, startled to see him. "I came back to return it," she said softly. "I shouldn't have taken it without permission." Adrian shook his head, stepping closer. "No," he said, his voice trembling. "You didn't take it. You gave it life." For the first time in years, his heart softened. He told her how her music had changed him, how it had reminded him of everything he'd lost in his pursuit of power. He confessed that his challenge that night was a joke, a cruel one, but her courage had made him see himself differently. Tears filled Elena's eyes. "The proudest heart," she whispered. Adrian smiled faintly. "He was right," he said. Then, without the arrogance of a millionaire or the showmanship of a man trying to impress others, he took a deep breath and said, "Elena, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'd like to earn it. Will you let me?" Years later, people in the city often spoke about how Adrian Devo changed. The once proud millionaire became known for his generosity, building music schools for children who couldn't afford instruments, funding programs for the poor, and living a quieter, humbler life. And beside him was always Elena, not as his maid, but as his wife. Their love wasn't built on wealth or promises, but on the moment when music silenced pride and kindness awakened something long forgotten. At every charity concert, Elena played that same violin, the one from that fateful night, and Adrian would sit in the front row, tears in his eyes, still in awe of the woman who changed him with a single melody. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us spread more stories that remind the world that kindness, courage, and love can transform even the coldest hearts. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what do you believe is stronger, wealth or the power of a kind and humble heart? Because sometimes it only takes a single act of grace to silence the world.